started. I know that Senator Bowers is on her way, and we have several online. So, moving forward, we'll reopen the hearing on Senate Bill 546. We completed our opposition testimony. We are now moving to the neutrals. First up on the list is Ed Klum. Welcome back to the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee members. My name is Ed Klump, and I'm here representing the Kansas Association of Chiefs of Police, Kansas Sheriff's Association, and the Kansas Peace Officers Association. Mr. Chairman, before I get started actually on my testimony, I'd just like to thank the proponents that reached out to us to work with us on trying to find solutions to the issues we raised in the hearing on Senate Bill 379. And just to remind everybody, our position is neutral. We're not weighing in on whether it's the right thing or the wrong thing to do to have autonomous vehicles. That's out of our lane. But what is in our lane and very important to us is having the right provisions in here so that we can fulfill our traffic safety obligations if the bill moves forward. I mentioned working with some of the proponents. When I wrote my testimony, I did not have a balloon draft yet. I have that now. And I can tell you that all of the concerns we have raised and that I've listed in our testimony are addressed in that balloon amendment. However, I'd like to highlight a couple of those for you in my testimony this morning. There's 9 actual concerns listed in there. There's 8 numbered, and then the paragraph right before the numbered list is the big one. And I'll talk about that a little bit. The most difficult concern to address in this is the legal processes to hold somebody accountable for traffic violations committed by autonomous vehicles, driverless vehicles. As you know, our traffic laws are designed to focus on the operation of vehicles when we're talking about the safety violations, commonly referred to as moving violations, not totally accurate, but the violations of speeding, red lights, traffic lights, signs, and things like that. We're taking a leap here that Kansas law has never gone into before, and that's how do you hold somebody accountable that's not physically controlling the vehicle for those violations. And as you know, there's very limited places where we hold the owner of vehicles liable for those violations. Those are generally parking violations and tolls and things like that. So that's a legal hurdle, I think, for our state that we haven't done before. I think the solution that's offered in the balloon, I think the reviser has done some good work on that. I think our conversation with proponents has been good. I think we've got that as good as we can get it. But I'd like to caution, Mr. Chairman, that if this bill moves forward, I think it would be a worthy venture to try to have that reviewed in more depth after the session is over. Whether the bill passes or it's going to be back next year, I think there needs to be more depth of study done on that where we can bring in prosecutors who prosecute these cases and understand it. That may be a judicial council issue. It may be something you just want to put together. But this is a very critical part that we get right. And I'm not super confident that we've got it right, although I think it will work the way it's worded right now in the balloon. But it's a very challenging area of this. In the other listed items, I just want to recap 3 of those for you because they're very important to us. And that's item number 1 in our testimony, about the middle of the first page there. This has to do with information on how we can contact somebody about that vehicle when there's no driver with it. And I want to just say the idea of these interaction plans being sent to KDOT does nothing for law enforcement. I'm not going to say they're not worth anything, but they do nothing for us. It's not the method of getting the information out that will ever reach the street officers at 3 o'clock in the morning, and that's what we got to be concerned about. So we asked for, and the proponents we worked with agreed that there would be a placard on the side of the vehicle with that contact information so the officer on the street can easily see that and know who to call. The problem with just having that in the interaction plan is that you're going to have an interaction plan for every company that has these vehicles out there. It's not going to be the same for all of them. And trying to access that information at 3 o'clock in the morning is difficult for officers. On the second one, which covers page 3, lines 1 and 2, section 2, subsection B2, we're concerned about the liability as that is written in the bill, and we believe it's fixed in the way it's presented in the balloon, in that it provides, in that interaction plan, is directions on removing that vehicle, towing that vehicle. Well, number one, we don't tow vehicles, and number two, if we're given information about how that vehicle should safely be towed, that's putting the responsibility on us then to convey that to the record driver and go to bring us in any civil suit if that vehicle gets damaged because of the towing process. And so again, we have wording in the balloon that I think will address that for us, but I just want to stress how important that is. And the third one and the final one is item number 5, which is on page 2 of our testimony, and it talks about page 3, line 38 through page 4, line 7. And this is where one of these vehicles is involved in the accident. There's 3 items listed there. Item C is something that we feel needs to happen in every case. And then items A and B in the current bill are one or the other in addition to C. And so that's been reworded in the balloon also. We're satisfied that the balloon will fix that. But those are 3 of the very important critical pieces in this, along with the legal processes that we were trying to get addressed. And Mr. Chairman, I'll stand for questions at the appropriate time.
Committee, any questions right now for Mr. Klump? Appreciate all your work with the people and getting the balloons drafted. Thank you. Next on the agenda, we have Secretary Lorenz, Department of Transportation. Welcome back to the committee.
Good morning, Chairman. As you've already welcomed me out in the hall, happy Pie Day, everyone. I think that means we all get an extra piece of pie today, or I intend to take full advantage. All right, so good morning. I'm Julie Lorenz, Secretary of the Kansas Department of Transportation, and thank you for allowing me the opportunity to come in and talk about this bill once again. It's an important topic, and it's an exciting time in transportation as technology is increasing at an exponential rate, and we see the impacts in our everyday personal lives. KDOT is neutral regarding this bill. This bill advances Kansas in technology adoption. However, we note a few safety concerns and have a few suggestions that we think will increase the safety and make this a better bill for our citizens, visitors, and users of the transportation system. I'll cover our recommendations now, but I would note that we do have balloon language that's been drafted and submitted as part of our testimony. First, the bill should align state agency authorities to reflect Kansas realities. And what I mean by that is that the provisions that require each state agency with jurisdictions over human-controlled vehicles maintains that jurisdiction over autonomous vehicles. The bill as it's currently written has KDOT as the authority for all of the components of the bill, and we are just suggesting that those jurisdictions should go to the agencies that currently have those jurisdictions. The next is the bill should include language that adds a human driver in AVs for all trips on identified routes for the first year of technology deployment. The bill should include a weight limit of AVs not to exceed more than 34,000 pounds and meet all applicable state and federal gross and axle weight limits. So this was just an increase in weight limits so that we can be in compliance with federal law. The maximum weight would sunset after 3 years, allowing larger AVs to operate thereafter. And this is the one that Ed just spoke about. The bill should provide for law enforcement action plans to be received by a law enforcement agency that has 24 hours a day, 7 days a week operations and can make that information available to first responders when necessary. KDOT doesn't, as a standard practice, have 24/7 operations. We only do that in snow and ice events. The bill should remove the exemption that provides KDOT the ability to grant an exception to traffic and motor vehicle safety laws for an AV. This is a federal standard controlled by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, NHTSA. All exemptions to safety laws should be left with NHTSA. The bill should extend the term of the Autonomous Vehicle Advisory Committee to allow more data to be collected from a rapidly changing technology, consider associated operational changes, and provide better education and outreach to stakeholders, communities, and transportation system users. We would recommend an advisory group be impaneled for 5 years. The technology is changing so quickly. There's a lot for us to learn as a state. The technology will keep changing in the next 5 years thereafter as well, but it's a way to bring our citizens along. It reminds me sort of, if you recall back, there was a legislative task force that met in 2018 and helped Kansans all remember why transportation is so important. Then in the next year, in 2019, KDOT pulled together an advisory group with lots of stakeholders, and then took a look at the legislative recommendations, talked with more Kansans, made a few modifications to those recommendations, and then in 2020, we were ready to bring forward the Ike legislation. So I do think an advisory committee that lasts longer would be helpful, and also maybe consider expanding it to include a city representative, maybe AAA or another safety group. So I think we could continue to take a look maybe at that advisory group. And then we go on to a few more things. The bill should provide language allowing AV operations to occur only on highways where we have at least 3-foot shoulders, or the vehicle can be moved off the roadway except within city limits. So that's a bit of a concern because not all of our highways have shoulders that you could move the AV off onto the shoulders. The bill should provide language to require a minimum of $500,000 for liability insurance on an AV to help alleviate concerns regarding AV causing harm to travelers. And then the bill should clarify, and this is a clarification, that a human safety driver should take over when it's reasonably foreseeable that a human driver should take over. So the way it's currently drafted, it says the vehicle tells a human to take over, and we're just saying, should that communication, for whatever reason, not happen, and the human driver sees it needs to take over, the human should just take over if it's foreseeably reasonable. So again, I'll say this is an exciting time in Kansas and in the transportation industry as we take steps to increase the safe mobility of people and goods across our great state. Thank you for allowing me to come back in and testify, and I'm happy to stand for questions whenever you're ready.
Did you work with the stakeholder groups or
Thank
Adam
you.
on a balloon?
Yes, shoot, I should have started that instead of the pie comment. Thank you. We have had good conversations with stakeholders. I appreciate particularly, I would call out, where's Sandy? Right. She has said over and over again, she keeps saying, I'm just the scribe, but Sandy's actually done a lot to bring people together, and we appreciate the opportunity to weigh in with the stakeholders. Thank you.
Committee questions?
Mr. Chair, one question.
Continue.
Thank you. Senator Pittman here. Thanks for the testimony, Secretary Lorenz. Always a pleasure having you in here. Do you foresee any more costs to the state that we should be budgeting for to account for autonomous vehicles in the near future or in the midterm future? I don't know if that would include oversight, if it would include any kind of special provisions on certain routes or anything like that, but
That's a really good question. So I have a couple, so I think not substantial cost increases. I think we need to add a staff person with really deep expertise in this area at KDOT. If we were to pull together an advisory committee, there would be some associated costs. I think those are part of our normal operations. What we need to be cognizant of, and why we really want to know the routes on which these vehicles, at least from a state highway perspective, we need to make sure if those vehicles, for example, most vehicles use GPS and they've mapped, but some vehicles really want brighter striping, those sorts of things. So we need to know where those vehicles are. So should there be any specific technology or bright striping or whatever, we'd need to know where those are. But I don't see that as an extraordinary cost.
Thank you.
Question, Mr. Chairman, Tom Hawk here.
Go ahead, Senator Hawk.
Thank you. You mentioned the 3-foot shoulders. How do you think that would be enforced, Secretary Lorenz?
I think we would expect our good partners to pay attention to that requirement. So I
And-
don't know that we don't have enforcement actions. So, I mean, I also think that we are not likely to see deployment. I do not think we're likely to see first deployment on highways without 3-foot shoulders. I don't anticipate that as a problem, but we want to put that in as an alert to make sure that we are all on the same page.
Another question, Mr. Chairman, on another subject variation, if I might.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One of the concerns that occurred to me on Thursday when we had testimony was at least the way the bill is written, and I want to know if you see it that way, Secretary Lorenz, that after that year, where essentially there's a study or a pilot period where there's a driver in the vehicle, it would appear to me that this would open it up to a lot of other kinds of uses. One that struck me that I'm a little concerned about is the Uber, Lyft, taxi type services. And I'm not sure where the technology might be, but do you agree the bill is written as such that if we passed it and implemented it in its current form, that after even an individual who might have an autonomous vehicle that they use to do Uber or Lyft or some sort of rideshare could then go ahead and have that autonomous vehicle without them in it?
I've
performing
brought
those services?
Jolene Savage, ks.gov Chief Counsel, is with me, so I want to defer to her on that question. But I do want to point out before I hand it over to Jolene, that's why I think this advisory group is so important, because it's not just like that technology is deployed in a vacuum and we just hope and pray it all works out in the coming year and then it's readily available. There is an expectation, or there would be my expectation, that through this advisory group, we are in contact and we learn about the experiences that the deployments are having across the state. And that then is the basis for each year, talking about what are we learning, have reports from what technology is working. And so, Senator Hawk, I don't know if that doesn't address your question, but I certainly want to put out there that I think this advisory group is very much about collaboration and providing good education and outreach and lessons learned. And if we need to make refinements to the bill, that's available as well.
Yes, Senator, you are correct. As currently written, the bill would allow Uber and Lyft, but you have to pay attention to that balloon amendment that KDOT offered, which says for the first year of technology deployment, there has to be a safety driver in there. So somebody who just owns a car that happens to have AV couldn't go stick it out there without a safety driver until the technology used in that vehicle has been tested for a year with a safety driver.
But,
Does that answer your question?
But at the end of that year, who would decide whether or not that vehicle could be totally autonomous without a safety driver?
And I don't know what this committee plans or what will pass. In my mind, I envision that advisory commission collecting this information, deciding, we're good to go, we don't need to amend our legislation anymore, and let's move forward, or we're not good to go, let's amend our legislation, let's require that safety driver a little bit longer, let's do some other things.
Would you agree that if
It
we
would be a
didn't,
recommendation.
would you agree that if we didn't amend it, and that year passed, then there could be an autonomous vehicle without a driver?
I agree.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
My name is Jolene, G-E-L-E-N-E, Savage. I'm Chief Counsel for the Kansas Department of Transportation.
Thank you. And that person that could do that Uber driver would only be after there had been someone in that technology with a safety driver for a year. Even if it was 2 years before they started, they would have to have someone in that technology for a year. That's the way I understand the bill. Is that the way you understand it?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Senator Wilborn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I think this is towards Secretary Lorenz, I believe. I'm going to show my naivety. I'm new to this committee, very interesting. Is there any model legislation or model regulations some other states have passed? Maybe that's been addressed and I missed it.
yes, so generally, I would say the bill was originally modeled after Iowa, is my understanding, if that, I'm looking at Sandy to make sure. After Iowa, so that would be a good example. So Iowa DOT's configured differently. They have lots of different, they have the DMV and everything. That's why we're suggesting that we make it, adjust it to reflect the jurisdictions of Kansas agencies. I would also like to point out, I do not think the advisory group is a decision-making body. They listen, they understand what's going on, they work with all the stakeholders, but they would not, the decision-making resides with the legislature, not with the advisory group.
Committee, further questions? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you.
As soon as I get my agenda back up to the top. Next up, we have James Murphy.
Yes, good morning, Chairman Peterson and other distinguished members of the committee. My name is James Murphy, and I'm the Vice President of Government Affairs for Locomation, an autonomous technology company. I've also held a Class A CDL for the last 20 years. I'm here today to offer a neutral position on SB 546 and provide my perspective as an industry expert on truck platooning. Locomation's Autonomous Relay Convoy, or ARC system, is a human-guided led convoy of 2 trucks that are electronically tethered. The human-guided solution enables one driver to operate the lead truck while a second driver rests in the following truck. Periodically, the trucks swap places to allow each driver to take turns leading and resting in compliance with U.S. Department of Transportation hours of service regulations. Locomation will enable carriers to safely operate 2 trucks for 20 to 22 hours per day, delivering twice the cargo, twice as far, twice as fast within the speed limit. 28 other states already allow for close following of non-lead trucks in a platoon and should be included in SB 546. As you're aware, Follow Too Closely laws were created to factor in the delayed reaction time that it takes a human driver to respond to events ahead of their vehicle and respond. But in the case of a 2-truck linked convoy platooning model, the computer-driven follower truck reacts near instantaneously and does not need the same following distance to react as a human. Again, thank you for the opportunity to appear before the committee today. I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have at the appropriate time.
Committee questions for Mr. Murphy.
Mr. Chair, one question.
Continue.
Thank you, Mr. Murphy, for being here. Is this technology you speak of, is it what we maybe have also called platooning?
Yes, Senator Pittman, that's correct. This is a platooning model that we're discussing here, where there are 2 trucks traveling together in a linked convoy that are electronically tethered to one another.
And in your opinion, does the current legislation open up the Kansas to this practice?
The issue with the legislation, which is why we registered a neutral position today, is one thing that is key in a platooning model is relief from Follow Too Closely laws. As you may be aware, states have their own individual laws that dictate how far apart commercial vehicles can travel from one another. With the Follow Too Closely law currently enactment, the trucks aren't able to travel as closely as we would like to one another, and the reason for having that close following is to gain some efficiencies in terms of reducing wind resistance, fuel consumption, things like that, and it leads to some pretty substantial efficiencies for both the trucks, looking at greenhouse gas emission reductions, fuel savings of up to 21%, especially right now with the price of gas. Anything that carriers and shippers can do to reduce their overall operating cost would be a benefit to them.
And then last question is, did you say that with platooning, the regulations around how many hours a driver can drive are extended?
They are not extended. So what we are looking at here is this model operates under current hours of service regulations. And when I reference the platoon being able to operate continuously for 20 to 22 hours, that factors in the available hours of service to the 2 drivers. The key being that the platoon is led by a human driver, and in that second truck, that driver is not supervising the function of the driving operations. That driver is in the sleeper berth, resting, not using their hours of service. And by switching off leader and follower, they are able to operate that platoon 20 to 22 hours continuously under existing hours of service regulations.
Thank you very much.
Committee, further questions? Seeing none, thank you. Well, committee, that does it for our neutral. I was intending on working 5:29 today. However, we do not have a quorum in the room. So with that, these balloon amendments are going to be proposed. We will be working these as soon as possible. Hopefully the proponents of everything will get these distributed so people can be looking at them ahead of time. Senator Tyson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This may be for the revisers or clarifying language. I know we heard a couple of people talk about having a year testing the software or testing the applications, but is that per vendor, per application, or is it just a year of this being available and then it automatically goes into effect?
Adam, can you address that? I believe in the balloon, it's a year after that each vendor starts.
Mr. Chairman, yes, I can't really speak to the balloons because those are proposed changes. The law itself, I believe, is for the entity. So if any proposed changes, if any of the people want to speak to their proposals, I'd probably let them. But the bill as it stands would just be for the entity.
And if I may, Mr. Chairman, clarification, if there's a software upgrade within that year, does that reset the year or does it continue from there? I'm just trying to get the logistics. Thank you.
I do not know. Sandy, did you want to address that as a year? We had a question that's kind of pushing into one of the balloons. It may be into KDOT's balloon where we have the safety driver in there for a year. I don't think the software update would be included, but the entity would have to provide a year of safe driving with the person in it.
It is written as technology deployment, not per vehicle, but that technology. If there's an upgrade to the software, how big of an upgrade is it? Is it basically new technology?
And if I may, Mr. Chairman, it's also different for different vendors. If it's a blanket 1 year, then, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
So I think you raise an important question that I can't answer, but it is one we need to probably go back and take a look at, which is what constitutes like a little fix versus maybe a wholesale upgrade becomes a new technology. We've also said per route. So it's not just a technology, but we want to know that technology is working on that route. So there are some details in there, I would say, that we do need to work through a bit. We're getting there. We've made great progress. But it is a person in the vehicle on the route, and we see how that deployment works. I also want to point out, it's not just for the first year after the bill is passed, in that if a new technology comes in year 3, then they have 1 year from the time they come into the state. So it's not just in 2023 that this covers all new technology regardless of when it comes into the state. I think that was understood, but wanted to make that clear. Yeah.
And I'll go back forward, and I think we've got some others that can talk about
Yeah, I'm way out of my depth on that, but it's the right question.
Thank you. And if I may, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, you may.
I should have asked, why the 3-foot parameter on the road? Why is 3 foot acceptable and no other measurement?
Well, I'll get up and answer this, and then my secretary will come up and. The 3 foot was selected in having a place for these vehicles to pull over if they experience problems so they can get off the road, so they don't stop right over the crest of a hill where oncoming traffic doesn't have warning. Generally, our highways with 3-foot shoulders have 1 to 3 slopes. The best way I can explain that is you see highways with the ditch, and then you see highways with a nice little level, we call it recoverable area. it gives them room to pull off and get out of those travel lanes, which are generally between your white lines on the highway.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Committee, any further questions?
Mr. Chair, just kind of continue on with Senator Tyson's question there, if I may.
Okay. We have someone, I think, wanted to follow up on the last question. If you can hold for just a moment, Senator Pittman.
Sure. Yes. Holding.
We're holding. Just come forward, state your name, and be sure that we get your written testimony.
Hi, I am Jackie Beckwith. Good morning. Thank you all for being here today. I also represent an AV industry group, but what is slightly different about us is we represent just goods movement technologies. So Locomation, the company that just testified, we represent them. So it's all scale of commercial motor vehicles, all weight classes. We also represent last mile delivery and low speed delivery devices. So none of these vehicles are designed to move people, which is the critical part. So I submit here my written testimony, and I also have some PDF testimony as well. And I know this bill has been talked about for many weeks, and there's a lot of stuff that you all are responsible for. So we appreciate the time, and especially the advisory committee is fantastic. It is important that all manner and all use cases for AVs are represented equally. It is not just robo-taxis, it's not just ride hailing. And in fact, commercial motor vehicles are already in deployment serving customers and retailers today. There is a very strong economic use case. And a couple of the points that have been talked about thus far in previous hearings for additional clarification. So first, ma'am, for the technology update, that is actually something that's being discussed right now in the vein of Tesla at the federal government level. They regularly issue over-the-air updates to their advanced driver assistance system, which is very different than automated driving. And right now, how do you issue a recall for that? What if it isn't safe? And that's something that every single state, every federal government is grappling with. There is no answer. And so Kansas certainly shouldn't be alone in trying to figure it out. When it comes to the law enforcement issue as well, certainly on behalf of commercial motor vehicles specifically, there has been a lot of work done with the American Association of Motor Vehicle Administrators, so representative of every single state's DMV, and then the Commercial Motor Vehicle Safety Alliance, or CVSA, in terms of how these vehicles should safely and responsibly interact with law enforcement. And every single state highway patrol is involved in these discussions, and we've come up with best practices that have been agreed on by both sides. Now, that's only representative of commercial motor vehicles and goods movement. So I realize that there are certainly two different sides to this discussion that need to be hashed out. But there are best practices that we've created in partnership with law enforcement, and happy to share those with you. This current bill, I am standing in neutral testimony because, again, we represent Locomation, and we also represent a company that is designed to never have a human in it. It has been built up from the ground up to just transport goods. There is no seat. There is no driver. So the 1 year requirement of a human driver would mean that they cannot operate in Kansas. And what this company does is they build a vehicle that's about half the size of a sedan. It operates on the roadways, and it carries prescriptions and groceries. And, you know, there are no people. That has a partnership with Domino's, and they work out of Houston, in case you've seen any of those commercials. And we also represent warehouse robotics companies where they operate both within and without the warehouse, like a yard jockey, if you will. I come from the traditional trucking industry. And so, you know, the commercial motor vehicle use case across all weight classes is really, really important. There is a lack of a stable, safe supply of drivers for commercial motor vehicles. Their jobs are so difficult. They go through extreme licensing. This technology has the potential and is already in 7 states, a lot of different states helping them. And so it would be wonderful to see that deployed in Kansas. And what I'll also say on behalf of especially goods movement, the community relationships are critical. Every single company that I represent dedicates time, energy, staff to coming into the communities, understanding how to make things work for this state, for that state, the concerns. You know, in Wyoming, they care a lot about railroad crossings. We spend a lot of time talking about railroad crossings. In Pennsylvania, there's a lot of discussion around platooning. So, you know, on behalf of commercial motor vehicles carrying goods, there is a lot of time and energy spent in advisory committees that are extremely representative. The makeups vary for sure. Should you have the DMV? Should you have state insurance? You know, and that's all really important questions. They're not decision-making bodies, but they do convene everybody. So I appreciate very much the chance to testify. It's fantastic to be here with all of you today. We are so excited about this, and it's been wonderful to see all the time that you all have spent. I'll keep it short, but I really appreciate, you know, the ability to be here. So thank you very much.
Committee questions, but we'll turn to Senator Pittman first.
Okay. Well, I wish I was there. I apologize. I'm not, because I would have loved to sit down with you. And I missed your name, the person that just testified.
Sorry, Jackie.
Jackie, I wish I could sit down with you because it sounds like you've got a lot of experience as well. You know, you're testifying neutral. You represent AV companies. I don't know if I really grasp, other than the provision where we have to have a driver and you have driverless vehicles. Was there anything else that you were asking? I mean, you put a lot of considerations out there, and in terms of what the advisory committee and the different issues folks are struggling with, and I think if we move forward, we want to be successful for all our AV partners out there, like the companies you represent. Was there anything else that you saw that, or would comment on in terms of the process we've got going on here?
Sure. Thank you for the question, Senator. So just want to reemphasize Locomation's point, but to follow too closely for the autonomous convoy system, which is in deployment in a couple of different states. So that is important to us since we represent them. And then the other company who right now operates within private grounds on warehouses. So that's private property, but the goal is to expand those operations. They utilize teleoperations. And so they don't have a person in the cab. It's yet one more vehicle that is designed to never include an individual, but instead they operate from remote systems. Now, I'm not super familiar with their business practices. As you all, I'm sure, can understand, these companies are incredibly competitive, so a lot of this stuff is confidential business information, and I just represent them. But this company utilizes teleops right now on private property, but I know their plans are to expand where legal to public property as well. And so that's maybe not a concern, immediate concern, but in terms of looking forward, sir, that would be the last point that I would emphasize as well.
Sure.
Thank you.
Chairman, I had a question for Secretary Lorenz, or the General Counsel is probably more appropriate.
Proceed.
So we, and I don't have it in front of me, and I apologize about that, but we have the 3-foot provision, and that seems to be on state highways. But we are also looking at allowing these across municipal and county roads as well. Was the idea that the 3-foot shoulders would apply everywhere, and those are the only routes that these autonomous vehicles initially would be allowed to go on? Was that the kind of intent of including that in there?
No, the intent was for outside city limits to have your 3-foot shoulders or a place where the car can leave the travel way. Within city limits, you're generally at your lower speed limits.
Okay. Got it.
It was, and you don't have those, sharp hills and things like that I said was a concern leading to the 3-foot shoulders.
Got it. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Committee, further questions? Thank you, folks. Committee, watch your agendas, because I am sure now that we will be having a meeting on Friday. We have had other bills that have been added to our agenda. We have several bills to work. I was intending on working 5:29 in the time today. However, we do not have a quorum present, so we'll have to fit that in. With that, we are adjourned.